So Diablo 4 has been out for a little over a month now, and we're starting to see all the different videos come out and posts, Reddit posts, comments, etc. about how the game is dead, dying, trash, etc. And while I do think that a lot of them have brought up some really interesting criticisms and some things that I've already reflected in my previous videos, which I will talk about today, there are also a lot of exaggerations here and a little bit of, I guess you could say, hatred towards Diablo 4 in the recent time. And that's mainly due to it just being a live new game, and people are falling off because that's just what happens. People play the game, they try it out, they find they don't like it, or they may just get bored because they want to find the next new thing. With that said, though, there's a few things that I want to point out that I am totally sick of hearing, and also some things that I actually think we should really be focusing on as a community, and whether or not it's something that you agree or disagree with, it's worth a conversation. First thing that I find completely ridiculous is Diablo 4 is a beta / unfinished game and has no content. I think this is hilarious because most of the people that say this and comment this are the same people that are level 100. And if you're level 100, then you've already invested 100, maybe 200 hours into the game, which is more time than most AAA full release titles are in terms of beating the game. And then they'll move on from that and say it's a great game, whereas in this game, it's a trash game and it's an unfinished game, and it wasn't worth the same amount of money. I think the difference between the two obviously relies in how much fun people have had, but that's not necessarily that the game has no content, it's just that you personally don't like the content that's in the game. They're two very different topics, which is why one is, hey, there's a problem with replayability in Diablo 4, and the other feels just like a strange complaint coming out of left field, which isn't really based in reality. The other one is Diablo 4 is dying. This is a really, really fun one because obviously it's the most popular YouTube title, and I don't blame people for using the title, but Diablo 4 is far and away from dying. To address even the previous point about replayability, most of that in ARPGs comes from seasons. That's kind of how ARPGs work. And in fact, all ARPGs that I know of have pretty poor replayability until seasons come around, which we're going to get one in a couple weeks here. But in terms of it dying, well, that's also part of the reason why people are leaving the game. People are moving on until season 1 comes out, or perhaps they're just moving on because it's a new release, they didn't enjoy it. But actually, Diablo 4 has one of the best retention graphs that I've seen from recent times. Heck, if you even compare this to other games that have been released like Lost Ark or even New World, right? These are full AAA MMORPG styles. Well, in Lost Ark's case, it's MMOARPG. You're going to find that those retention graphs are much worse looking than Diablo 4. And we will see a big resurgence when Season 1 comes around. And we haven't even had our first season of the game, so we really can't say what that graph will look like and whether or not it will actually keep people around for long term. But to say that it's dying is completely a mischaracterization of where Diablo 4 is at the current moment. But then we move on to the actual valid criticism of the game and where a lot of these other, you could say, exaggerations come from. And the first one is level scaling. Now, there's a few misconceptions about this, and there's a few really, really concerning things about this. The first misconception is that, when you get a higher level, you're not going to be able to come back and one-shot the beginning monsters because they are the same level as you. In what world has anyone ever played an ARPG, leveled up and got their insane build, and then gone and played previous content and not realized that they're absolutely insane? If I go and I fight a level 1 monster as a necromancer, yeah, I might do pretty good damage with my bone spear. But then I get my full build online, I come back, and now I'm doing potentially tens of millions of DPS, one-shotting even bosses. There's not even a comparison between the two. You absolutely can go back to the starter zones and one-shot everything. But that's not really the issue here. The issue is actually the process of leveling. And that's where leveling scale becomes potentially a little bit of an issue. And that is where you level and you become less strong until you reach the point of I'm ridiculously strong. Now, some of this leveling scaling actually ends up being solved within Nightmare Dungeons, which Nightmare Dungeons don't have leveling scaling. Nightmare Dungeons have static levels based on their tiers. So when you're actually doing content, now that they buffed Nightmare Dungeons, as soon as you reach World Tier 3, leveling scaling isn't really a thing anymore because all you're doing is Nightmare Dungeons anyways. But in terms of going through and interacting with the open world, yeah, when you're in the World Tier 1/2 realm of the game, you might find that there's a little bit of a power drop off as you start leveling, and that is a component of making the game less fun. And ideally, that's the focus of all criticisms. Is it's not about this game is going to lead to bigger revenue numbers or bigger player base. It's about whether or not the player base finds these mechanics fun, because at the end of the day, it's a game, guys. If you're not having fun, you shouldn't be playing it. The second really interesting criticism that I've seen is that the MMO design has really hindered the game overall. And I would have to say that this is probably one of the big things that I agree with, ironically, because I actually really enjoy MMOs overall. Despite that, I think that the way they've rolled out a lot of the MMO features has been a little, I guess you could say, unfun. The things that they've brought in from the MMOs are the things that I typically do not enjoy, like side quests, the fact that I have to potentially be online all the time, and the fact that the open world is kind of just there, but not really something that I want to interact with due to it not being scaled to the way and be valuable compared to Nightmare Dungeons. Which is kind of funny because, again, that's kind of the main purpose of the open world, and the reason that they added it is to interact with their players and to give you a reason to see all the other players in the world. But with the new Nightmare Dungeon teleporting, with the new Nightmare Dungeon buffs, you basically spend 90, if not 99% of your time in dungeons where you never see anyone because you just teleport to them now. So the open world is completely, I guess you'd say, obsolete now, with the exception of Helltide zones. And that also means that the MMO design has really hindered a lot of its gameplay, but it's also hindered its storytelling as well, because with MMOs, typically, MMOs generally don't have good story. It's just kind of the nature of MMOs. But there are some exceptions. You know, some people will mention Final Fantasy. Some people might mention even Star Wars: The Old Republic, those of you that played it, which have actually quite solid stories. But in my opinion, even the best of those don't really compete to the best of the solo experience stories. And I do think that a lot of our memorable moments in Diablo 4, at least mine, don't necessarily come from the story itself, but rather the actual gameplay or potentially the cutscenes, which don't necessarily reflect the story itself, just the small pieces that we got inside the game. And of course, it wouldn't be a fair video talking about the major criticisms out there without talking about build swapping. And I would say this is probably my biggest criticism of the game. And I know some people will say there's supposed to be an identity for your class, some sort of, reason to want to grind out gold so you can invest into a new build. I would say that that's totally fine, but the costs are too high for your average player, while also the actual quality of life of it is bad. And it doesn't matter, let's say you do want there to be some sort of commitment to a build. That's fine. There shouldn't be any argument, though, against the quality of life of it. For example, being able to remove all of your Paragon points with a click of a single button, rather than going through and individually clicking away at the points. There should be no argument against that, because all it is just removing the part of clicking the nodes in your menu, which no one wants to do anyways, right? It has nothing to do with being committed to a build. It has everything to do with just making people do tedious things as if it was a chore in order to try out something that they truly want to enjoy. And of course, as I mentioned, the cost associated with it is exceptional for the majority of average players. And that forces them to stay on a certain build, which is already not fun for a lot of players. But also, if they did end up with a mediocre build or something that they found to be less good, then they're going to be less inclined to swap because it's so expensive. And that may end up making them have a quit moment in which they're no longer enjoying the game and decide to stop playing. This is definitely something that needs to be addressed at least from a quality of life standpoint, but preferably from reducing the costs as well. The people who say they're committed, that you should have some sort of commitment to your build, are projecting how they wish to enjoy the game, when in fact, most people that are already at that point who are committed to the game are not bothered by the cost because they're going to grind so much, whereas the people that aren't that way aren't grinding enough to where they have the goal to be able to do it. Instead of just projecting how you wish the game to be, at least listen to the majority of player base who aren't able to do that and just wish to try out new builds. Lastly, we have one thing that I actually found to be enjoyable, but that's actually because I'm a Guild Wars 2 player, although there's a little bit more skills in that game as well. But generally speaking, in MMOs, you have an infinite amount of skills. Not quite infinite, but if you've played World of Warcraft, if you've played Star Wars, if you've played these other MMOs, you would know you have bars on bars on bars of skills. Potentially, at a single time, 50 to 60 potential skills at a single moment that you can use. That is a lot, and oftentimes a little bit too much for most people. But in this game, you've kind of gone the opposite direction, where you have essentially 5 skills and a basic, but for most builds, it's going to be 4 skills, a basic, and an ultimate. And if you want to even kind of go more specific, you have a basic, a core skill, an ultimate, plus 3 utility skills / additional damaging skills, most often utility skills. And if you even want to go a little bit more specific, most of those builds are forced into specific options like vulnerability and other specific damage / survivability bonuses due to it being core and very important to your overall effectiveness in the game. And I do see that as potentially a big issue for some people. As I mentioned, I'm a Guild Wars 2 enjoyer, and so in that game, you have a significantly less skills than all your other MMOs, but if you compare it to other MMOs, it's less. If you compare it to other ARPGs, it's less. And there are a lot of other options that you could go with. For example, potentially adding some additional skill slot, or offering the ability to kind of add additional skill slots by speccing into additional skill slots. So adding some way to, again, instead of having, let's say I put a point into this skill, I can put a point to unlock a new skill slot and then put a point into the skill. This may work for some builds, it may not work for others, making it a little bit more of an interesting option to create some additional interesting builds. More skill slots we have, the more interesting builds become, I think, generally speaking, but also the more broken they become. So it'll be a tough thing to balance, but probably something never going to be changed by Blizzard. It's just something that's nature to the game, but I do understand why some of the critiques have happened about it, because it can sometimes be a little bit boring to see, oh, I just sit there and spam my core skill, and then generally speaking, for every other build, you're just spamming 1, 2, 3, 4, all the different abilities that you have, especially for characters like the Druid and the Bard. You just sit there, spam every single ability that you have, and that's how the classes work. But those are the criticisms that I've seen. Those are the ones that I think are also something that Blizzard could potentially change. And then, of course, I wanted to just completely dismiss some of the other meme exaggerations that I've seen. I think it's just because people don't enjoy the game and they come out with saying that the game is dead, dying, or a beta. The game is a live service game. For anyone that's played a live service game knows that you're going to get updates, you're going to get changes, and that the game is never finished. But to say that it's a beta or to say that it's dying is just not true. And hopefully we'll see a couple of these things addressed by Blizzard that hopefully will kind of change people's perspectives on this. But of course, if you don't enjoy the game, don't bother playing it. And if you do enjoy the game and none of these things bother you, who cares about what I've said in this video? Ignore it. I don't care. It doesn't matter to me. As long as, you're enjoying the game, as long as I'm enjoying the game, I'm going to keep making videos, and I'm going to keep playing it. Let me know what you think in the comment section down below. If you're really interested in seeing a little bit more of the, Diablo 4 dying type conversations, or you're mainly just kind of sick of it at this point, like myself, because we haven't even gotten season 1, and the game is already like in this doomed mentality. Thanks for watching. See you for the next one.